Mr. Lavery, how are you, my friend?
Good morning, sir. How we
How
doing, brother?
man, life is good. How are you doing?
Life is sure is good, man. I'm fantastic, man.
Brother, I'm so excited to get to do this and so grateful for you taking the time, man. We're gonna have young men on from all over the world right now, and this obviously goes out to people all over the world as well. But just you taking the time to pour into these guys means the world, man. Truly.
No, man, I appreciate it. This is a privilege for me, brother.
I appreciate that very much, man. You have background, you know what we're going to be doing here. You know where this is all going. You know what we're doing this for. And the way we roll is, you and I are going to chat about you a little bit here and give people some context, because as cool as it is when we got these amazing young men that'll be live with us on the call, this does go out and we have parents and young people who listen to this all over the world, 6-figure downloads every episode too. So there's a lot of inspiration that people pull out of this. We want to talk about you for a little bit, make sure people have the background, and then I'll be quiet and all of these guys will come in with the better questions, man. So we'll have a fun hour.
Perfect. Perfect.
Beautiful. So I'm hoping, if you don't mind, I'd love to start. We got guys here as 12, 13, 14, 16, 19. But I'd love to go back and start with Nick when he was 12, 13. What did that guy look like? And what I mean by that is, we get some amazing human beings that join us every week. And one of the common themes is, people think, oh man, that guy's always had it. He's probably just always had it together. And Timmy and I talk about what we were doing at 12 and 13. And I'm like, oh man, these guys are so much better humans than we were. Right. So I love to take people back and just go, man, well, here's the real deal of what this guy was like at 12 or 13. Let's start there, if you don't mind.
No, I'm glad you started there, brother. Because you're right. Especially when you've got the world as small as it's gotten due to the internet and social media, which enables amazing opportunities like this. And people catch a glimpse of an individual, and it's more often than not highly polished, highly filtered, right? It's like that person at their prime. And then there's this idea created around that one snapshot that, this person's always had this, or there's a loss of humanity that comes with that. And I'm in an awkward position for me now where I'm receiving that now that I'm kind of getting out there more often. And, people see the cool guy photo of me with the one leg on the mountaintop of Afghanistan. And they're like, oh man, this dude was like built for this. And this is amazing. This like superhero idea. It's like, nah, man, that nothing could be further from the truth. And to answer your question, bro, my childhood was difficult. It was really difficult. People see me now and I'm 6'6", 240. And they just assume I was this massive, intimidating, dominant individual my whole life. And it's the complete opposite. It's the complete opposite. I grew up a extremely small, scared, insecure kid. And that really defined me for the good portion of my childhood and all the way up until I was a young adult. My family and I, we moved about every year. So I was the new kid in school every year, all the way up until I got to high school. And that's hard, man. That's really difficult. So I struggled socially. I was picked on. I was bullied. I was beat up regularly. And because of that, I found myself yearning for respect. I was yearning for strength. And actually, there were times, man, in my inexperienced, immature ways, I wanted to be feared because I was so scared. I was a scared kid that lived that way daily. I wanted to be on the other side of that. And I didn't find it for years. Eventually I found it in the military, but prior to that, man, I was a small, undersized, scared kid with no friends because I was in a new spot every year. And by the time I grasped onto somebody who looked like it could be a bro, I was on to the next spot. So it was really difficult for me.
That's really tough, man. So there's a lot of great stuff right there. So talking about being that young, scared guy, I got kind of a two-part question. because I think a lot of gentlemen can relate to this, and whether it's the young men on the call, the young men on this call have phenomenal parents leading the way, almost really across the board, and they're amazing young humans. But this goes out to some of these guys that are also feeling the same thing. What was the support like at home in that fear, right? Going through that, and some of that stuff is normal struggle. Some of that stuff is expanded because you're going through these things where you're having to make new friends all the freaking time. What was that support like at home? And why, and this may be a part of it, but why did you not end up going down the route of, well, here's what I'm going to do to make sure I'm feared? Like, how did you avoid that? So it's a two-part question.
Yeah. So my support system at home was phenomenal. I come from, both my parents are amazing human beings. They divorced when I was a freshman in college. At that point, I was a grown man with a lot of life experience, learned the hard way. So it didn't really affect me all that much while they were together. And since, amazing people. They had me really young. I'm the oldest of two. They had me really young. So while they cared about me, and both my father and my mother were helping me through the challenges I was going through, they were grinding. They were both working multiple jobs, just trying to keep a roof over our heads and keep food on the table. I was not neglected in any way. The support was there. The concept of bullying, Matt, back when you and I were kids, wasn't looked at the same way it is today. And we've learned a lot about how traumatic that can be on young people.
Yeah.
Back then, man, it was just kind of part of being a kid. And, I wasn't brushed off when I would walk home beat up. They would be addressed. And I don't know how many times my father would walk me down the street to, knock on a neighbor's door and have a conversation with that kid or that kid's dad or whatever. That happened countless times. But it wasn't looked at with the same level of severity that it is now. And although it was really hard, I can look back now, many years later, with an enormous amount of gratitude for having gone through those struggles at a young age. Because now, fast forward to today, right? I'm 40 years old. I've been a Green Beret for over 16 years now. Resiliency is within my lifestyle. I teach it. I advise on it. The foundation of my resiliency, my mental toughness, began for me at the age of 5, really, in kindergarten. At the time, impossible to appreciate it that way. Impossible. Sure. You just don't have the perspective. But you can fast forward now for me, 30 plus years later, and go, wow, I would not be the guy I am today if I hadn't gone through those hardships at the time.
For sure.
So that's your first question. The second one, I'll answer briefly because, how did I avoid going down the road of trying to be feared? And the answer is I didn't avoid it. In fact, I actually did it. And I made a lot of really horrible decisions in pursuit of that. And this was more so when I was a little older. When I was in college, I was in my 20s, Mother Nature eventually came around. I had this massive growth spurt. I went from this little peanut, wrestling at 123 my freshman year of high school. And now I'm an outside linebacker at UMass, at 6'4", 6'5", 230 muscle, right? So I took extreme advantage of my size and all of the training that I had been doing in boxing, combat sports, jiu-jitsu. And I started going down a real unfortunate road on how I was wielding that power that I now had. And it felt really good. To be honest, it felt good because I had never had it. And now I was the one being feared. And I fed off of that. And I made some horrible choices. And it was looking like it was going down one of two end states. Fortunately, with the help of some family, some friends, some mentors, I was able to redirect my strengths and attributes into a positive direction. And that ended up being the military for me.
Oh, so good, man. Gosh, there's so many parallels with our own story. I mean, obviously everybody that's seen me in person knows I'm 6'6" is what I'm 5'9". So that maybe there's not all the parallels, but so many parallels, man, of, my old man, I've talked to these guys about it. His old man was in law enforcement, but he was more on the training day side of things, and very much had to be the hard had to be the hard guy. And yeah, I was getting bullied too. And I remember being 9 years old and I'm going, oh, those are the two guys that are bullying me and they're a little older. And he's like, all right, cool. Pulls over to the side of the road. He's like, get out and go fight them both. Let's go. This is the only way we're going to, so that was the start of like, here's how you handle things. And I took that the wrong way as well for a long time. So thankfully what you said is you had family, friends, mentors who came in and steered that energy, which is normal masculine energy, like that default aggression, the want and desire to achieve, to have the adventure, to check those boxes. That's not a bad thing. It's got to be harnessed in the right way. Yet these people come into your life. What were those conversations like? Was it more family? Was it more friends? Was it mentors? What were the conversations like that got you to go, hey man, let's not be a D-bag with all this. Let's use these gifts to go serve.
Yeah. Family had a decent influence. And I say decent because they really didn't know all that much of how I was living and what I was doing. I'm in my early 20s. I'm in college. I'm already kind of off the grid from my mother and my father and my sister. I would say coaches is probably at the top. Right? I was a college athlete. I played football in college. I was wrestling. I was boxing. I was in martial arts. I would give a lot of credit to my coaches at that point in my life, in my 20s, that really recognized the power that I had and some of the strengths that I had, because they were some of the ones that were cultivating it alongside me. They were teaching me.
Right.
Like, these guys were teaching me how to be aggressive. They were teaching me how to defend myself and fight and go on the offensive when I needed to.
Yeah.
And they were close enough to me to notice some of the ways in which I was wielding some of this responsibility. And that's an important word because that's what it was.
Yes.
And those guys were the ones that really helped me kind of redirect it. They weren't pushing the military on me specifically, but they were like, dude, with great power comes with great responsibility. You're a massive, really strong, athletic individual that knows how to fight. We can use this in society for good if you just choose to direct that in a positive direction.
That's awesome. So how did military come on your radar? Like, how did that become a potential avenue? Because you hear these stories a little bit and guys decide to go serve in different ways. How did the military specifically come on your radar, or something like, maybe this is the avenue I need to go?
Yeah, it first became a serious option for me, Matt, when I was in high school. And again, horrible student, struggled academically. I excelled in athletics, but that was really it. Lacked direction. I was going to become a Marine. You think of the toughest, baddest people on the planet, the Marines oftentimes come up pretty fast. They've got phenomenal commercials, phenomenal marketing. Like, that was going to be my outlet to be strong, to be respected, to be feared in a positive way. In high school, that was the game plan. Only thing that stopped that from happening was I started getting recruited to play football in college. So I went to college, and then my sophomore year was 9/11. And, I'm sure, I know exactly where you were, but probably most of the guys in this conversation with us right now weren't alive or were too young to even understand what was happening. Those of us that watched that live, it's a moment we will never forget. And although I didn't have the red, white, and blue coursing through my veins like I do today, certainly proud to be an American back then and all that, the amount of rage that I had about what I was witnessing was something that I could not ignore. So I struggled to stay in school at that point because I knew where things were going. Again, listen to some coaches and some mentors. I decided to stay in, grind out my degree, stayed out of enough trouble to make it to that point. And then at this point, we were surging in both Afghanistan and Iraq. The game was still very much being played. And that was how I ended up making the decision to make that move.
Wow. Yeah, man. So many parallels. That was my senior year in college. Very much remember, where I was, and it was in the fall, obviously. So the beginning of a new year was my last year too. And the same thing, I started visiting recruiters for various branches. And I threw out an application to Secret Service as well. And that was the first thing that got back to me. So that's where I went down that entire road, my entire senior year of college, because I'm going, okay, I want to do something. I didn't know what that meant. It was just, I want to do something. So I very much, I get the emotion behind all that. So you end up going into the Army. Did you know Special Forces right away? Like, that's where you wanted to go? Was that obvious for you?
No, it wasn't. I mean, let's be careful with our terminology. When you say Special Forces, we're talking about the United States Army Special Forces, because words do mean things. And
yes, sir.
These phrases get used interchangeably all the time.
Understand.
And it's fine. while we got some young, eager minds in the room, we can just
Yep.
throw some education, like
Yep.
the overarching umbrella terminology for all of our special operations personnel, which include SEALs, Green Berets, Rangers, CCT, EJs. That falls underneath Special Operations Forces, more commonly referred to as SOF, or the acronym SOF. Underneath that, you've got United States Army Special Forces, which is a specific unit within SOF and then also within the Army. I knew I wanted to be in special operations. I had no idea which unit or which branch, but the SEALs came to mind first, which doesn't happen by accident. Those guys are also very good at their messaging and their marketing.
Yep.
So I walked into a recruiter's office and said, I want to be a SEAL. And he's like, cool. Well, we got to get you into the Navy first, and then you can request to go to BUDS and do that thing. I left. I walked down the hall, had the same conversation with the Marine Corps, got the same answer, walked down the hall, the same building in Boston, Army recruiter, and said, hey, I want to be in special operations. They say, hey, we've got this contract option known as an 18 X-ray contract option, which stands for Special Forces Recruit, which gives guys off the street as civilians the chance to bypass spending any time in the conventional Army and just going straight into the Special Forces pipeline. So that enticed me. The speed in which I could get to the front of the fight enticed me, but I didn't know really anything about what Green Berets did, what SFODAs do. I knew nothing. I was seeing the movie Rambo, John Wayne, but like, that's all I knew. Right. So the internet, fortunately, at this point was like kind of just coming online. It was kind of a thing in most people's homes. So I had access to some information, did some homework. And although it did give me the fastest route to the front of this fight I wanted to get into, I was drawn to our primary mission set, and that is of unconventional warfare. So it ended up working out great where I could do the type of work that I felt like I wanted to do, and it could get me doing it faster.
I love that. The speed. Yeah, speed matters. Now, when you say you're getting to do the work that you wanted to do, one of the things that, we talk about often, and it plays out, it's great to have all of these amazing mentors come from so many different backgrounds, because you end up seeing that the road is not this linear path for any of us. And a lot of times when we're defining what we want to do, there's an element of we don't go straight there, and then it's not exactly what we thought it was. For you, what were the conversations going on in your own mind? Did this look like what you thought it was going to be? Was it harder, easier, different, more annoying, better? Like what did that look like? When the realization hit of like, okay, this is what it actually means? What was that like in your head?
Yeah, man. Well, first off, coming into the military was intended to be a short-term thing. I was going to do a 5-year contract. I was going to get to the front of this fight. I was going to kick some ass, serve my country, get some payback, and then get out and then figure out what I was going to do with the rest of my life. This was not meant to be a profession or a lifestyle by any means. Unfortunately, as you said, it's a non-linear path. And when I found myself in Afghanistan for the first time as a Green Beret, within a couple of months, I realized, for one, I absolutely love this and I can't imagine doing anything else. And then two, the sense of purpose I have with what I do, like a meaning attached to it. And people often are struggling with answering the question, what is your why? Like, what is the point of us being here right now? What are we going to be doing with this gift of life we've been given? I was able to realize that as I was doing it, but it took me doing it for me to see that, right? I had to execute on it for that epiphany to hit me. In terms of like the difficulty of it, I really went in with very little expectations. I knew it was going to be really hard. I knew physically they were going to push us, and mentally, and they were going to push us to the extremes, emotionally. And you certainly do go through that. Surprisingly enough, give you guys a little bit of insight. Like basic training, for example, everyone is nervous and scared when they show up to basic training. I don't care who you are, how tough you think you are. It's nerve-wracking. I was a 24-year-old college graduate with a lot of life experience, and I was scared and I was nervous. You don't know what to expect. Like, how difficult is this going to be? I've seen the movies, I've read the books. Like, is this going to be horrible? No idea. Basic training was actually pretty easy. And this isn't a tough guy machismo thing. There were a lot of young people around me that this was the first time they had left their homes, like 17, 18-year-old kids.
Yeah.
And I took that on as my greatest responsibility, was like the mentorship of the people to my left and right. Getting yelled at by a drill sergeant, having to go run a couple miles was like, okay, fine. This like didn't affect me at all, but it gave me a chance to spend some time with some young people 6, 7 years younger than me that were just leaving the nest for the first time. So that was actually pretty cool. But the training was pretty basic, basic training.
Yeah.
Once we got into the special forces side of things at Fort Bragg, I got into selection and going through the qualification course. Certainly challenging. It pushes you to your limits as it's intended to do. Surprisingly, you'll see just a variety of people that do really, really well as do horrible, and they quit, on day one.
Yeah.
Like Division I athletes that commit and they're just studs and they don't last 2 days. And then you've got just kind of the random, wouldn't pick this person out in a crowd, average looking, average built, average everything from an optics perspective, and they absolutely annihilate it, right? So there really isn't, in my opinion, like a type of individual that will do well, because I've seen who you would think would dominate don't have it. They don't have the mentality. They don't have the toughness. They got some physical attributes, but they don't have everything upstairs needed to go through it. And then on the other side of that perspective, you're like, this dude's not going to last 10 minutes. And he makes it all the way through and becomes a phenomenal operator.
Crushes it.
So my expectations were pretty minimal going in. It was obviously really hard, but looking back, man, like there's a method to the madness. And really, if you want it, you will make it. You just have to want it bad enough. And your reasoning behind wanting it has to be that clear and crystal in your mind, because that is what you're going to grasp onto when it gets really hot.
Is that the determining factor between those guys, between the guys that you're like, okay, Fitz like stud, should do it. This guy's a sack, like he's in trouble, but he's the one that ends up making it. Is that the deciding factor between the two? It's because they have a strong enough why, and because they're just so determined, like they're just determined to make, like, I mean, is it literally that?
I would say that is a critical ingredient. I don't think you can point your finger at one thing and say, this is the one thing that will separate the winner and the loser, the one that makes it, the one that doesn't, but a firm grasp of your intent, of the why you're doing it, and having that be rooted in actual honesty. Now, if that is because you just want to see how hard you can push yourself, like you're just looking for a test, then okay, that's okay. I don't think the reason matters as long as it's authentic and real and you can see it, smell it, touch it, and taste it, because that is going to be what you grasp onto when you're at your lowest of lows. That will be what pulls you out of that and facilitates and enables you to continue to push forward.
Very much so. Do you see that same mentality, that same thing play out as the operators go on these missions, as you guys go and you get into the firefight? Do you see that same mentality be the thing that pulls guys through? Is there an element of an added brotherhood, like comparing the selection process, which is notoriously difficult, to the actual stressors of being in combat? I can't imagine, and again, I'm speaking from ignorance and just having friends that have been in the fight, and so is it the same thing, that same why that you hang on to? Does it transfer over to be more of your brothers when you're in the firefight? Is it a little bit of both?
Yeah, I can speak for myself, and I'm positive I speak for most, that there is a shift that goes in. When you're going through selection in the Q course, there are many points when you're working as a small team, many, many, many points where you're working as a small team or even a larger size team, but it's mostly an individual journey that you're on, right? You have to prove yourself to yourself and to your instructors and to your evaluators. It's 2 years, a little over 2 years, depending, where it's mostly about you demonstrating what you can do. And your why is whatever it is that is driving you to want to be a Green Beret in this instance. Once you get to the team, it changes, man. And certainly once you get forward deployed and you're in a combat environment, Then for most, and absolutely for myself, it becomes about the people to your left and right. And you have an obligation to them. You are putting your life in their hands and they're putting their life in your hands. And that's not something to take lightly. And, you asked to be a part of a 12-man team that's going into an environment isolated. Like that's what Green Berets do. And every single person carries an enormous weight, both physically and figuratively. So I think that there is a shift that takes place with that intent and with that why. It's no longer about, I want to be the baddest dude on the planet and have my arms over my head with war paint on my face. Like that will probably always exist somewhere within there, us as men and as warriors and as war fighters and as providers. But in those types of arenas, I think it becomes more about to the people to your left and right.
Is that what pushed you probably get sick of talking about, and I don't want to ever reduce anything down to one specific injury, but it's a catastrophic injury. And is that the mentality around that? And I cannot wait to read the book. I'm just finishing Lovell's book right now, and I can't wait, man, to dive in. Super grateful for you sending that over. Was that the mentality that pushed you there and made you want to get back in?
It's a great question. There was a noticeable shift within that process for me as well. And similarly to coming in the beginning and wanting to be a Green Beret and going through selection and Q course and then getting to the teams and operating in that environment, it was almost the exact same. When I was in the hospital, intensive care, the whole thing, fighting for my life, no leg, I knew I was going back to the team. And it began for me as an individual mission that I was on. I needed to get back to doing what I was put on this planet to do. It was about me proving myself right, me proving everyone else wrong. It was about myself. There was some ego filtered in there as well, which gets a bad rap, but there is a way to leverage that for positive use as well.
Yes, sir.
For me, it was driven through those lenses. And I'm grateful that I was able to have that level of independent dedication because it got me through a lot of really hard times. It wasn't until 18 months or so after, and I was going through the reassessment process that my unit put me through in order for me to earn my place back onto the detachment. And my unit threw the kitchen sink at me. I mean, they tested me for everything you could imagine and probably some things that you can't imagine. I was maybe a week or two into that, what ended up being 12 weeks. And I woke up in the middle of the night in a panic. And I realized that I was going back to a team. And I had not thought about that once, even though I had my team around me physically, day to day, almost constantly. We're training together. We were doing things together. They're like, man, you got this. I mean, it was a team effort. But in my mind, it was about me doing what I needed to do. And then that epiphany hit me and it scared me to death. And I felt horrible about myself because I hadn't thought about that. I went into work and I was like, I grabbed the guys, sat everybody down. I'm like, hey, listen, I am obsessed with this. In fact, I am so obsessed with this that I cannot see this objectively. I'm that tunnel vision obsessed. Have you guys talked about this? I mean, I feel horrible. I apologize. I haven't thought about this. This conversation should have happened a year ago and it hadn't. I'm a horrible teammate. I'm a horrible person. Have you guys thought about this? Because if you tell me right now that I have no business being back here and that you don't even want to give me a shot at it, I will find a new way to live the rest of my life. And they were all like, listen, man, we've talked about this dozens of times. The answer is we don't know if this is going to work, but we want to be the ones that decide if it does. We don't want any commander or other decision maker to decide this is our team. You're a member of this team. We want to be the ones to see if we can make it work. And if you are that asset that you need to be, or if you're a liability, which there's no place for. Once that happened, rather than walking into my third training session for the day, exhausted and sore, and all the justifications are sounding the most convincing, rather than me thinking about this glorifying moment, getting off the plane back in Afghanistan with my arms in the air, telling the enemy that they should have killed me when they had the chance, rather than thinking about that, I was now thinking about my teammate's 5-year-old son. I was thinking about my teammate's wife. And I need to annihilate this workout and every single movement within it because they're all put there deliberately not for me, but for them. And
Mhm.
it took my output and my productivity, which was already at an astronomical level, to a whole nother dimension that I didn't know existed, was when I began looking at them as the reason why I was doing all the things that I needed to do.
Freaking ready to run through a wall right now, man. Yeah, I love that. I admire that so much. One of my friends, Jack Donovan, talks about uh, the difference between being a good man and being good at being a man,
Mm.
and how the best men are both. And you hear things like that, and your mentality around it, not just the I'm going to push through, but the reasoning before that, right? And the fact that it is an act of service in your mind too. That's a good man, and obviously good at being a man as well, man. So it's, you talked about this is only meant to be, it was meant to be a 5-year deal. You're 16 years in now. What is kind of the overarching view at this point as the world continues to shift and things are, it was as weird and wild as they've ever been? What is kind of the mindset around that now? Are you going to 20 and you're calling it good? Are you continuing like, hey, this is until I'm 6 feet under? What is kind of the mindset for you now?
Yeah, so I'll definitely do 20. That's been a personal professional goal of mine for a while. You always leave room for the unknown. I would be surprised. It would take something pretty compelling to keep me in beyond the 20-year mark. And I say that still loving what I do. And I do consider it a privilege, and it's an honor to do what I do every day. I'm in a extremely blessed position, particularly for service members who oftentimes struggle with transitioning into civilian life. I've determined what my post-uniform purpose is, and I'm living it now. It's a nights and weekends side hustle passion project, but I know what that is. So in the more I do it, the more I'm falling in love with it, which is a good problem to have when both of your professional lives you enjoy doing and they become conflicting and competing. It's a great problem to have. So I am eager to kind of continue pursuing down those avenues as my full-time thing. So I think that's probably the way things are going to go. While I'm still in, man, at least another 4 years. I just left a team life behind maybe 5 months ago now, which in itself is a really hard transition. I lived the ODA life as a one-legged guy for almost a decade. And, to move up, quote unquote, as a company operations warrant officer, which is what I am now, I would have sworn to you, brother, that I will hate any other job I get for the rest of the time I'm in the uniform.
Sure.
Most of us come in, the special operations guys, we want to be team guys. We want to do it forever, and it takes its toll. It runs its course. You obviously can't do it forever. But I've realized that, which I did very quickly into the position I'm in now, that it's surprisingly and amazingly fulfilling. And although you lose the intimacy with a little bit with the guys on the ground, and you're not the guy kicking down the door, and you're not the guy rappelling out of the helicopter onto the rooftop at 3:00 in the morning anymore, those days for me are done. Your sphere of influence broadens as you move up at echelon. And now you've got these young savages that are coming in, getting to the teams, 22, 23 years old, hair on fire, ready to take down the global war on terrorism all by themselves and just, live it. And I can just remember being that guy, what feels like 10 minutes ago. So it's an important responsibility. It's an awesome responsibility that we now have as mid to, as we elevate into senior leaders, where our span of influence is broadening, where we take all these hard lessons that we've learned through blood, sweat, tears, and treasure, and we ram that knowledge into the next generation. And that, my man, as you know very well, is amazingly fulfilling. So I got a lot to learn still here with this new position. I got a lot to learn. I got plenty of mistakes to make, but it's a privilege, and getting to go to work and do what I do daily is an honor.
That's exactly, and those are the exact words, man, and going through my head. What a privilege, and what an honor, and well earned in your case, sir.
I'm an open book, guys, so feel free to ask anything that's on your mind. The relatively short version is we were on a 6-month deployment. We had been there for 5.5 months. We just had a couple weeks left, getting ready to go into an operation. with a bunch of different partner force units. Partner force meaning locals that we work alongside of. And just so you guys understand, Green Berets, we don't do anything by ourselves. We have a lot of special operations units that are built to work what we call unilaterally, meaning just them. So a team of 15 guys, those 15 guys will go do an operation or go do a mission or go do whatever work needs to be done. We got plenty of units that do that, and they do it really, really well. Green Berets, Special Forces detachments, we are built to work with indigenous local personnel. That's what we do. As per usual, we're getting ready to go on an operation with a bunch of different locals. And prior to that, a member of the Afghan National Police Force jumped up on the back of a Ford Ranger pickup truck that had a PKM, which is a big belt-fed machine gun, attached to it, and he opened fire into me and my teammates from about 25 or so feet away. Considered the most catastrophic insider attack that we know of. There were 12 Americans that were killed or wounded, 3 of which were killed. Myself and another 8 were wounded. Most of the damage to me was done to my right leg. It was estimated that it was hit 5 or potentially 6 times. It was basically just mangled. I mean, it was ripped to shreds. Imagine like a shark getting a hold of it and just tearing it to pieces. By the time that I was able to actually look at it, exposed bone, exposed tissue, a river of blood flowing from me to where I had initially been hit. And I treated myself with a couple tourniquets. I treated myself with what we refer to as an internal pressure dressing, which means that you take a bunch of gauze and you ram that gauze inside the wound, feeling for the pulse of the femoral artery, which is the major blood source that runs through your lower body, through your legs. I did that, which is as horrible as it sounds. Like you can imagine having like a massive hole in your thigh, and then you ram your fist into the hole, reaching around, trying to feel for the pulse of an artery. It's as difficult as it sounds like it is. It was really hard to do. Obviously, you got adrenaline that's pumping, kind of helps take some of the edge off, but it was hard. I did that, and I got really lucky because I absolutely nailed my femoral artery and was able to close off the blood, at least enough for me to survive on the battlefield, which I was there on the ground about 90 minutes before the first medevac bird could land. So medevac, medical evacuation helicopter comes down, picks us up. To make matters a little bit more difficult, once I got in front of a trauma team, I was essentially out of blood. So they needed to put a blood transfusion on board, which they did. And a good amount of time went by, and eventually they realized that they had given me a blood transfusion with an incompatible blood type. Now that is catastrophic, even for perfectly healthy individuals. Like that will kill you. In the medical world, they refer to it as the impossible scenario, because we have so many protocols in place when it comes to blood that it's almost impossible for that mistake to happen. Well, it happened with me. And I was in the process of being flown to another hospital when they realized the mistake that had been made. And they let the crew know that there was no way I would survive that flight. There were a couple medics on that flight with me, young, one of which was a private. He was 18 or 19 years old. He'd only been in the Army for like a year. Him and another guy a little bit more senior, and they catch wind over the radio of my status. And they do not have blood on board. They can't do a transfusion. They can't do dialysis. These guys are standard flight medics. But there are some things that they can do. And what do you think those guys did when they got the word that I was a lost cause, that I would die? You think they just sat back and just said, okay, cool, well, I guess we'll just kind of hang out? No. These two savages dumped out their med bag onto me, and they threw every tool that they had at me. every tool that they had at me. I've had a chance to talk to these soldiers years later, talk about the power of social media. It's amazing. They threw every tool they had at me. They had panels going, like clear, clear. They had those going. They pumped me full of 6 times the allotted amount of adrenaline that they are authorized to give a patient. 6 times the amount. So you could just imagine these 2 young animals, right? Like we're whipping across the desert in a Black Hawk helicopter in Afghanistan. They catch wind that this mutant who's been ripped to shreds will die. And they just start trying stuff. They basically turned me into like a living science experiment
For sure.
on a helicopter. Let's just see what happens if we do this. It can't get any worse. Obviously, I'm extremely grateful for their somewhat insubordination, but we'll just go ahead and say for their aggressiveness and their willingness to take a risk. Both of these guys took a risk on me. They were risking their career. They risked their reputation. These guys were doing things that they technically were unauthorized to do. All right. Now, there is a really fine line to try to walk. In fact, I don't think there is a line. I think you have to decide in that moment what right looks like. Right. You've got protocol, you've got policy, you've got these things that are in place for a reason. And then you've got your morals and you've got your character and you've got doing what you know in your heart is right. And are you willing to take that risk in that moment? It's an independent question. I'm not sure if there's a right and a wrong answer. If these guys sat back and just let fate take its course, then, that would have been fine because they weren't expected to do anything. But they did. They did what they did. And obviously I'm alive here to talk about that, along with dozens and dozens and dozens of other people that were involved in keeping me alive. I think your second part of the question was, how has it affected me? It's affected me basically in every facet of life. When you live 30 years of life with 4 limbs and then you go down to 3, most things change. But I want to stress just one thing with that is what I do has not changed. The what has not changed. The how or the hows have changed basically across the board. I still do the same things that I did before when I had 2 legs, and I've learned to do more new things since. How I do them, however, is different than most. So it's about just modifying and adapting and learning and trial and error and figuring out how to go about doing this when you go from 4 limbs to 3 or 2 legs to 1. It's tough to give a blanket response because every scenario is different and every situation is different, which is what makes this so difficult. It's what makes it so hard. And I'm going to answer your question with a story because it answers it perfectly. A lot of what I do and what I teach, I talk about fear and how powerful fear is for us and how some of the greatest moments in life exist on the backside of fear. If you can just get yourself to do it anyway. Well, there are times when you're going to want to listen to fear. Like fear is built within to us on purpose. It's a defense mechanism to keep us alive. Okay. If you're walking down a trail and you see a grizzly bear and you get scared, that's on purpose. That's because that thing will eat you. So leave that thing alone and go someplace else. That would be a poor time to, Nick said ignore fear, so I'm going to walk up to this bear and slap it in the face. Horrible idea, right, within that environment. And this right here is what makes this so challenging. This is what makes progress so challenging and living to our fullest potential so challenging, is we have to be able to make those decisions in real time, including all of the indefinite or infinite variables that will exist within all of these different equations. When we equip ourselves, we train, we learn, we make mistakes, we prepare ourselves to be able to make that decision, but they're all going to be different. And that's what makes this so difficult. To answer your question with an example, so on this same deployment that I was wounded, where I eventually ended up getting my legs shot off, I was wounded twice prior in 2 separate occasions. The first time I took some grenade shrapnel to the back of my shoulder, and then about 4 weeks later, I took an AK-47 round to the face. Both of those times, it took me out of the fight for 4 or 5 days just for me to get stitched back up, put back together, and then I was right back to work. The first time, grenade shrapnel, back of the shoulder. Hours and hours and hours later, once we got back to the house and everything was calmed down, I eventually got a helicopter and I got in front of a doctor who took a look at me. And he said, okay, Nick, here's the deal. Here's how we treat this. Because you have this massive hole in your shoulder, we can't just sew it shut because it's going to leave an open cavity inside your body, which would be prone for infection. So how we treat this is we're going to pack this thing 4 or 5 times a day with this antiseptic gauze so that it will close from the inside out. That's how they treat that. I said, okay, seems pretty simple. I'm like, can I go back to my guys? And, I have a medic. We had 2 medics, although I could do this myself. Like, we can take care of this with my guys where we're working out of. His orders were negative. You are going to remain in this location that you're at now until this thing heals entirely, because I want to make sure it's closed so that infection doesn't set in, because infection's no joke. I mean, infection can kill you. I said, yes, sir. Well, about 4 days went by, and I had enough. So I went down to the tarmac where all of our planes were located, and I went from one to the other, looking for one that was flying to Bagram, which is where all of the rotary wing, meaning all of the helicopter flights, were generating from, that would get me to where my guys were working out of. I didn't tell anybody this, right? I had orders from a doctor officer telling me, you will stay here where you are until this thing is closed. 3 or 4 days later, I said, I'm out of here. Got on a plane, flew to Bagram, the other side of the country, got there, walked in, talking to my senior leaders. They were like, what are you doing here? You're supposed to be over there healing. I'm like, right, but I'm here now because I need to get back to my guys. So it turned into a little bit of a thing. The change of command, or the command that was at the location that I had left from, they eventually obviously found out that I was gone, and they tracked me down, and I had a really candid, direct conversation with my company sergeant major, who used a lot of 4-letter words as he came unglued on me over the phone for about 5 minutes. But at the end of that conversation with him, he said, listen, man, I get it. All right. Your heart's in the right place. You need to get back to your guys. I've been there before, bro. Just don't ever do that again. And I said, of course, like, roger that. So there's just an example of me disobeying an order, which is what it is. And usually that's a bad thing. When you're in combat, in combat for real, there's a little bit more of a gray area. There's a little bit of grace that's offered to human beings, regardless of your rank and your position, because of the extremes that we are operating within just about every single day. It does change it changes the dynamic. It changes the environment. And we're soldiers and we're service members, and we're expected to follow orders regardless. That is true. However, you need to be the one that makes that decision when it looks like you've got a hard and fast, this is what I've been told, but my heart and my morals and my integrity are pulling me into a different direction. And there's no blanket answer to this, man. There's no like, this will be the way to go. You guys have to work on equipping yourselves and preparing yourselves now, mentally, physically, emotionally, otherwise, to equip yourselves with the knowledge and the experience and the tools to make that assessment in real time and then make the decision. The one thing that I can tell you is that your integrity and living through that, which is easy to say and extremely difficult to actually do, especially as a young person, if you can prioritize that and start living through that idea now, and with small, relatively simple decisions, those begin to compound. That process begins to become more and more automated, where you're making the right decision morally, ethically, and legally almost automatically. If you can force yourself to do that in the small moments that you feel like are irrelevant, right? Hey, my curfew is 10. Like, I'm going to stay out till 10:15. It's just 15 minutes. Like, it's not a big deal. Okay, well, maybe the 15 minutes itself isn't that big of a deal, but the fact that you are sticking to doing what you know is right and giving up the 15 minutes, that effect is what begins to compound over time. And I just say that because these decisions are really difficult to make, and we're going to get them wrong. But the more we err on the side of integrity and values and our morals, the more often we're going to get it right. And that effect is what compounds over time. In some workshops, I'm going to hit just a couple things briefly. One is asking yourself either prior to the event or in real time, like, what are you actually afraid of? And more often than not, we're talking about your emotional well-being, i.e., being embarrassed, being ashamed, if things go wrong, right? If you fail, right? Fear of failure is the result most often externally. I'm afraid of being judged. I'm afraid of coming across as weak, or I'm afraid of losing my friends, or it's an externally driven fear of getting it wrong or fear of failure. More often than not, I would argue that's the case versus I'm afraid I'm going to sprain my ankle. That may be the case if you're, standing on the top of a building and you're like, oh, should I jump off the building? I'm scared right now, because you're supposed to be like, yeah, maybe there's a fear of physical damage. That's certainly a thing. But when you get under the squat bar, for example, and you're trying to push a 1 rep max that you've never done before, the fear is oftentimes driven by failing and what that's going to do to me emotionally. Not so I'm afraid I'm going to tear my ACL in half.
So in a way, it's your ego not wanting to be hurt. Do you understand what I mean? Because if
I
you
do.
fail, then
I do. I think that puts it a little, I think it oversimplifies it. And I think it takes a lot of the rationalization and reasoning away. Human beings are social creatures. It's part of what separates us from many living organisms on this planet. We are designed to want to be around people. We're designed to want friends. We're designed to want a pack. We're designed to want to attract members of the opposite sex. This is part of what makes us humans. So to just say, like, ignore everybody and do you, well, that's really easy to say, but it also goes against human nature to quite a degree. Yeah. So it's perfectly expected for that fear of failure and that fear of ridicule and embarrassment and judgment. It's normal. That is supposed to happen. It is there on purpose. But if you can recognize that and say, okay, like, what am I actually scared of? Is it this? Okay, cool. Well, let's just play this thing out, because there's a fear one way or the other. I'm telling you right now, in the moment, you're only seeing one, but there's another one that's literally existing right next to it. And that's the fear of regret. Yeah. That is the fear of regret. One of the two things, you will be scared of both. You may only be thinking about, I'm scared to go up and talk to this girl because I'm afraid she might tell me to get lost. And that's going to really hurt my feelings. It's going to hurt my ego. It's going to hurt my emotional well-being. That damage will happen. That's the fear you're thinking of. But right next to it, in parallel, there is a fear of regret. That is, if I don't do this and I look back in an hour or a week or 10 years and go, man, what if I had just gone over and said hello? Like, what could have happened? I could be living a whole different life right now. And you can continue to play this thing out in any scenario, as long or short term as you want. Yeah. So I'd say, just know, for one, you're oftentimes, the fear is generated from external criticism. Mm-hmm. Do you have the strength and courage to accept that? Yes or no? Easier said than done. Easier said than done, because again, this is part of us as humans, period. And it's amplified for us as young people, because we're striving for social acceptance, friends, popular, sit at the cool kids' lunch table, all whatever it is. There's that. And then secondly, the parallel existence of the fear of regret. And if you choose to fear that more, that can and oftentimes will propel you to go do the thing anyway. Mm-hmm. And then lastly, I'll close it by saying there is an incredible power that exists within failure. Again, the thing that we're likely most afraid of is getting it wrong or failing. I asked the girl out to dinner. She said, no, you failed. Like, because the mission was for her to say, yes, you walked over, you shot your shot. She's like, I'm good. You're like, okay, that's a loss. And that hurts. It has to hurt. Okay. The pain is the catalyst to learn the lesson, because the wisdom is located in getting it wrong. The knowledge exists in the failure. Yeah. And once you recognize that, and you start extracting that wisdom over and over and over again, I'm telling you, brother, your biggest challenge will become your recklessness as you begin pursuing failure with consistency, which is a whole separate conversation. I just want to end with that by saying it's normal to feel failure. It's part of our survival instinct as human beings because emotional wellness is tied directly to physical health. Those are directly connected on a hormonal, physiological level. Emotional damage can make us sick, and positive emotions can make us well. So that's why it exists. So don't feel guilty about being scared of something. It's there on purpose. But just know that the knowledge and the ability to get better, whether that's asking the next girl to dinner or doing the 400-pound or 200 or 100-pound squat or doing better on the next test in school, whatever it is, the wisdom is located in getting it wrong. And as soon as you can realize that and you begin to weaponize failure, you begin to become a lethal asset. So as Green Berets, as I mentioned, we work with and through Indigenous personnel. So part of the requirements to be a Green Beret is you have to have a, quote, working knowledge of a foreign language in order to be able to do that job. The first foreign language I learned when I was in the Special Forces qualification course was Russian. That was relatively short-lived because I got to my unit and all my unit was doing was going into Afghanistan and not a whole lot of Russian being spoken in Afghanistan. So I went back to language school, and over the course of 4 months, I learned how to speak Dari, which is one of the prominent languages spoken in Afghanistan. So I learned Dari, and I maintained that as my primary language for, 8 or so years. And from there, I onboarded Persian Farsi. Persian Farsi is mostly spoken in Iran. And me bringing that language on just had to do with the units that I was working within and some of the areas of operation that we were within. So I'd say I have a working knowledge of Persian Farsi and Dari. And those are very similar languages. Dari is really kind of just like a lazy version of Persian Farsi. Persian Farsi is a language that goes back to like the beginning of time. It is one of the oldest languages we have. Dari is like a slightly more newer version of that, just kind of lazy, a lazy version. My Russian's gone pretty much completely by the wayside because I haven't touched it in over a decade. How did I go about learning it? I'll tell you, I talked earlier about the difficulties of the Q course. For me, language school was the most difficult part of the Q course for me. There's a lot of physical stuff involved. I did pretty well with that stuff, but sitting in a classroom for 6 months learning Russian was brutal. My brain just, it didn't take to it. I took the approach like I do with most and just blunt force, just reps, just deliberate reps, and locking myself into my barracks room and just forcing myself to read, write, and listen. Blunt force aggression is the route that I went. I will just say that once you learn a language, a foreign language, it does become easier to learn follow-on languages. I couldn't tell you if there's any kind of neurological science attached to what I'm telling you. This is just someone who's learned 3. I feel like there's just a part of your brain that kind of gets switched on where you begin to more quickly learn verbiage modification and tenses and tones and sentence structure once you start playing around. So foreign language is an incredible tool, regardless of which one you learn, both in terms of how you can use that one language and as well as your ability to learn more. I'm going to go with the first thing that comes to mind. You know, I'm in the hospital bed, right? Leg gone. I'm like, I'm going to go back to being a Green Beret on a team. No idea how I'm going to do that. I had to accept the reality that as an athlete and as someone whose primary service that I provided to my teammates was as a physical force, I would never be as physically dominant with one leg as I was with 2. That was hard for me to accept. That was really hard for me to accept because I identified as this physical specimen who was really good at that stuff. And it scared me that I would lose my identity because of that. Once I was able to shove that pill down and swallow it, choke it down and swallow it, because it's true. I could spend, it doesn't matter how many hours I spend in the gym, hours I spend on the track. You go from 2 legs to 1, you're not going to be as physically dominant across all sectors as I was. Okay, roger that. The goal, however, is not to be the same physically dominant person I was. The goal is to be an asset on a team. That's the goal. I was able to kind of shift into that space and say, all right, well, then let's just go ahead and say that I'm not going to be as physically dominant as I was. How can I make up the difference with what I'm going to lose physically in order to be the asset that I need to be? So see how we're kind of changing the conversation. This is all happening in my mind, but I'm changing the conversation. I'm changing the questions that I'm asking myself. Well, there's a lot of stuff that we do in special operations and as Green Berets. And a lot of it gets focused on the cool guy stuff, right? The jumping out of planes and the kicking down the doors and, you know, ripping 400 pounds off the ground, deadlift and shooting bad guys in the face. A lot of it's the physical, high speed, sexy stuff, which is what draws most of us to come and want to do it. There is, however, and you learn this once you start doing it for a little bit, there's an entire host of other skills and requirements that have to get done by somebody in order for any of the cool guy stuff to happen. We'll call it nerd stuff, okay? And there's plenty of it. There's plenty of nerd stuff that has to happen. Somebody is going to do those things. Otherwise, you're not kicking down the door and shooting the bad guy in the face. For example, because you don't know where the guy is. Just as an example. You got to find the guy. Okay, like where is the person at? We need to answer that question. So I realized that there's an entire host of skills and advanced skills and capabilities that I had not ever gone anywhere near, that I felt if I invested myself into those arenas, it could make up the difference for what I was going to lose physically. And I invested myself within those areas. I'll tell you right now, just to kind of close the loop, it proved to work. Okay. It proved to work. Because once I was back in Afghanistan as a one-legged guy, the first time I was back over there, I was able to actually apply a lot of these different skills that I had forced myself to learn. And I added that additional value to our team and to our mission. But in real time, while I'm doing this thing, it's important to know that I despised doing most of these things. What I wanted to be doing, I wanted to be in the weight room. I wanted to be on the shooting range. I wanted to be on the track. I wanted to be in the fight house. Those were the things I enjoyed doing. And leading up to this point as a two-legged guy, the things I enjoyed doing were the things that my teammates needed me to do. So it was great. Now I was in a whole new dynamic. It was an entirely different environment. I had to go do all these things that I completely despise based off of a faith that I think it will work. I believe that this will work. I don't know for sure, but I believe that this will work. And I believed in it enough that I was able to hone in on the discipline that it took to do all of these tasks that I wanted nothing to do with. And that's the one word I want you to take away is discipline. In my opinion, it is at the foundation of what it takes for success. If we only do the things that we need to do when we feel like doing them, the game is over before it even starts. You will lose. You may make some progress. You may feel good. You may enjoy yourself, but you will lose. You will lose to the people and to the person that is doing the things that are required when they don't want to do it. That's the differentiating factor. People oftentimes are struggling and seeking motivation. I get labeled as a motivational speaker. I get hired to go motivate people all the time, and it's fine, and I get it. In my opinion, motivation is one of the most overrated terms that we have right now. People are seeking motivation. Believe me, there's value that exists when you are motivated. I look for it daily. Sometimes I find it, sometimes I don't. But when we are only doing when we are motivated to do it, it's over. All right, the game's over. And this is just an example based on your question of where the discipline that I decided to rely on to do the things I needed to do, knowing that I disliked them, but they were rooted in a belief that it will work. That is what enabled me to actually do it. So that change, as you mentioned, for me began with this identity of being this big, strong, physical monster. And although I'm going to continue to train to remain and excel beyond that, I had to be honest with my environment and with my circumstances, and then learn how to leverage those things when I was on the ground, seeing what I was dealing with. Basically, immediately, when I realized my femoral artery had been cut, my first thought was, this is where you die. There was no question about that in my mind. I've had enough training and I've seen it live enough to know the severity of that kind of wound. This is where you will die. And people are often like, what's that like? Laying on the battlefield, bleeding out, knowing you're going to die. It's a good question. For me, the emotional roller coaster went as this. It began with a high degree of frustration because out of all the gunfights and the explosions and multiple deployments and all the things that me and my teammates had been through, I was going to be killed by a guy that I taught how to use the machine gun that he just shot me and my friends with, right? That kind of a sense of betrayal, twisted that knife, so to speak. So that was frustrating. That was extremely frustrating, but I got past that pretty quick. And then came on this sense of guilt that I felt about what my family was going to endure. And this image of, my mother at Arlington being handed a folded flag by some general in front of my casket. I had that image and I felt really bad about what my family was about to go through. I was able to get past that pretty quick because although I knew it was going to be really hard for them, I knew that they knew that I was exactly where I wanted to be, doing exactly what I wanted to do, doing exactly what I was put on this earth to do. As I was laying there dying, I knew that my parents and family knew that. So that helped me it took the edge off a little bit. It's going to be brutal. The idea of losing a kid, I have 2 young boys. The idea of losing one of your children it doesn't get worse than that. All right, as a parent. So this won't take the pain away by any stretch, but it took the edge off just a little bit. And I've talked to both my parents about this, obviously years later, and they both have told me like, you know what? Yeah, like we did know that. Like it would be horrible. It would be horrible, but we know that about you. And that would ease the tension a little bit. And then from that guilt, it went to this place of content where similarly to what I just described, for me to do the things that I needed to do, I'm just talking about myself, I had to adopt this mentality of I will return with my shield or on it. And that's it. And I'm totally fine with either of those outcomes because this is what we do. And I chose to be here. This is not only did I choose it, I had to go through years of really hard stuff to earn my position here. This is where I am. This is where I'm supposed to be. This is what I do. I know full well the risks and the potential consequences that come with this, and I accept those completely. If I'm going to die as a warrior, you are supposed to die alongside your brothers in combat. And I was like, okay, cool. And that's really where things stayed. And, I think that state of content with it kind of helped because I had a lot of work I needed to do, right? So even though I knew I was going to die and I eventually got to a place, and this all happened really, really, really fast, man, really fast. You kind of work through that. It was like, all right, even though that's almost certainly the outcome, there's work to do. So get a tourniquet, put that on, get a second tourniquet, put it on, get to work, focus, work, go. But emotionally, that's kind of what I went through. As I was in the intensive care unit at Walter Reed, still fighting for my life, it was there that I'll use the word decision. The decision was made of me to going back to doing what I do. I'll put the word decision in quotes because there was no alternative for me. There was no alternative for me. Okay. This is who you are and this is what you do. There is no backup plan. There is no contingency. This is a complete and total burn the boats environment. That's an expression you haven't heard. Matt's going to bring you up to speed on what that means because it's powerful. Okay. There is no backup. This is what you will do. The decision for me was made then because there was not an alternative decision to make. And this comes purely, again, as me identifying my purpose in life, which I was fortunate to be able to do at around 26 or so years old in Afghanistan, living the life that hit me then. The meaning, why am I here? This is who I am and this is what I do. That is what drove the rapidness of being able to just hone in on that answer. Because again, I didn't consider it to be much of a question. Shift in question, words mean things. So what I was able to do because of that, the what am I going to do question never touched my mind. There was no what am I going to do, which is something that a lot of people struggle with. I don't care how old you are and what your circumstances are. What am I going to do? What am I going to do? Whether it's on the backside of a traumatic event, or you just wake up 3 years in a row going, what am I doing here? Like, I'm just floating through life. Like, what is the point? People of all ages and shapes and sizes ask themselves that question constantly. For me, I knew the answer to the what am I going to do, which allowed me to proceed all roads to the how, which again is an entirely different question. I knew what I was going to do. I hadn't a clue as to how, but I just simply chose to see it as an equation that could be solved. And I knew the answer, right? If you know the answer to an equation, just think about basic math. If you know the answer to an equation, it becomes considerably easier to solve the equation, right? 2 plus blank is 5. Well, shit, it's 3. Excuse my language. It's 3, right? 3. I know the answer. The answer is 5. You could line up 800 numbers prior to that, but if you know the answer, it's going to make the equation easier to solve. I knew the answer because I've got 2 young boys now. The oldest is 6, so still got a little bit of time before we got to cross that bridge. But you know, am I gonna try to influence him in that direction or not? And you know, the life of a father is really difficult, and it's one you learn through trial and error, like anything else. I think, generally speaking, my friend, that if you find yourself being called in that direction, whether that's because you want to serve your nation, whether that's because you're passionate about national security or our way of life, or just the life of service in general, if you're striving to, if you're yearning to find a way to push yourself physically, mentally, socially, and the roads continue to land on military service, I don't think that there is a right age to do it. I think it's just when that calling becomes strong enough to where you feel the need to act on that. The military in today's world, there are so many options that exist, and you have so much more control over what you are going to do when you come in prior to coming in. And I had this in you know, even in my generation, but you think of like years prior, you just show up and say like, I want to be a soldier. And they're like, cool. And they choose what you do. Like, you have zero control. In today's world, you have influence on that. And then all of the extra benefits that come alongside becoming a service member just continue to grow as well. Education, training, certifications, like things you can leverage outside of military service as well. So if you choose to make that decision, I would recommend that it's rooted in a degree of self-awareness. You know why you want to do it. I don't believe that there is a right or wrong answer for that. Just know what it is. Just know what it is. And when you look yourself in the mirror and you say, I want to be a soldier, or I want to be a Marine, or I want to be a Navy SEAL, or whatever it is, and you ask yourself why, you know the answer to that question. You know the answer to that question. And then lastly is, you know, we've never lived in a time where we have access to more information than we do now. It's unbelievable. Like, you have a question, boom, answer, solved. So the I don't know is an excuse. Almost the problem is there's almost too much information out there. That's the other side of the problem. I don't know is ridiculous. Get out there, do your homework, study the different branches, study the different job options within the branches, know what you think you might want to do and what the requirements are to come in and be able to do that, right? The testing, the physical requirements, your scores, know those things because they're literally right in front of you, and hone in on maybe 1 or 2 that seem to be kind of catching your attention and making your heart rate speed up a little bit, catching a little bit of a fire inside you, whatever that is. And then start working towards those outcomes that you already know what they are. Hey, I know I need to score X on this test. I need to be able to read at this capacity. I need to be able to run 2 miles in 13 minutes and 30 seconds. Like, the information is literally right there, my friend. So you have it in front of you. Hone in on that and then begin to build yourself up to set yourself up for success. And because typically if someone takes a rifle round to the face, they're not alive to tell you that. I got really lucky. The round, it literally just grazed my cheek. There was some shavings of the round that were wedged into my orbital socket, but it didn't break the bone. It just ripped my cheek open. It sliced an artery, so it bled a lot. It looked like a zombie kind of took a bite out of the side of my face.
Yeah.
So it was ugly and it bled a lot, and I was covered in blood. But I didn't actually know that I had been shot for like hours later. This was in the midst of a massive ambush that my team and I drove into. Our lead vehicle was decimated by a massive IED. 6 of my friends were inside, critically wounded. 2 of them should be dead right now, but they're not. So during this engagement was when I was hit, but at the time I was maneuvering through a densely vegetated apple orchard. So I had thought that I had run into a tree branch and it knocked me over because we were fighting. And next thing you know, I was looking up at the sky. I had no idea what happened. I thought I had run into a tree. Turns out that one of these dudes that we were duking it out with actually clipped me in the face. So, I got really lucky, and I got even luckier because hours later, once I got in front of a doctor, there was an Army reservist doctor. So Army reservists, they're like part-time soldiers, kind of. He was there, but in his civilian life, he was a plastic surgeon who owned his own plastic surgery clinic. So I had an Army doctor who was also a plastic surgeon. So he was able to put my face back together in a manner that you can barely tell. I mean, I got a little bit of a scar, but it's no big deal. It's tough to say what worked. Having talked to some doctors, years later, they think that the amount of adrenaline that they had pumped into me in conjunction with the panels, that they just kept recharging my heartbeat. And although I was basically out of blood and the blood that was in me was toxic, the amount of adrenaline that was flowing through me was enabling the blood, although it was killing me, to keep me still somewhat alive. It's the best answer I can give you, man, because no one really knows. 1 stripe, purple belt.
Okay.
I've been on the mats now in a little over a year. I had shoulder surgery back in like July, and it's just now starting to kind of come around. So it's been a while. I assume you do jiu-jitsu, which is why you asked. Amazing. One of the greatest investments that you can make. One of the greatest investments that you can make is within jiu-jitsu or combat sports in general, but I'm a little bit more partial to jiu-jitsu and wrestling and kind of the grappling sports. Even though I grew up more as a striker, I grew up as a boxer, and then you started getting into kickboxing. And then I didn't add a jiu-jitsu till way later, actually, till I came in the military, and it turned very quickly into my favorite discipline and method of training. They're all phenomenal. But jiu-jitsu does take the blue ribbon for me a little bit. If you continue to invest in that, I can guarantee that the effects you get off those mats will transcend well beyond what you're able to do in your grappling game. I do some coaching with young kids, and just to like young kids, like young, like 6, 7 years old, watching and more so hearing from their parents or guardians months later. I'm talking 2-3 months later, they come back, they say, hey man, Johnny is doing better in school. He's doing better at home. The discipline of listening to a coach, but more specifically, and here's why it applies to anybody, no matter how great you are, is being put consistently into uncomfortable positions and navigating through that both physically and mentally. That is what jiu-jitsu gives you, because what I just described is life.
Yes, sir.
That is life, man. So congratulations for being interested in that. I cannot stress enough, those that are not, I would strongly advise taking a look at it. You're going to be scared. It's going to be painful. It's going to be difficult. You're going to be embarrassed. That is why it is as valuable as it is.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, sir.
My brother, you and I had a chance to connect on the phone, and I got off there and I was like, man, that's an easy conversation. I love everything about that guy. I have so much respect, not just for the story, but just for the man that you are and the way you show up. Out of hundreds of amazing calls that we've had too, this is one that took me on myself personally, selfishly, on an emotional roller coaster, man. And just extraordinarily grateful for who you are and how you show up in this world, and the dent that you've already made, and what I know you're going to continue to do. How do we support you best? Obviously this goes out, and we want to promote anything that we can promote and help share the book and the story. But how do we support you just as an organization overall?
I'll tell you, man. I'm gonna steal some words from my good buddy Sean Ryan. He just did a post yesterday, I think it was. It was in reference to Memorial Day, and he says, how do what's the appropriate way to celebrate Memorial Day? And his response was, ask yourself the question, did I live like an American today worth dying for? And I don't know how you say it better than that. Obviously, he's talking about this great holiday weekend we're walking into, but it also, I think, answers the question you just asked me, Matt. How can you best support me? Is live to your potential. Live to your fullest. Find the line between determination and madness and stay on it. Both as a service member and just as a member of this society that I share this planet with, and this society in America with. We do what we do so that we can live a lifestyle over here that is rare. And I know how easy it can become to think that it's dogs and cats are living together and like we're all doomed. And when I get a chance to spend time with young people like this, it reminds me that it's the minority of most societies that propels them beyond into the next echelon. It's the minority. It's the select few. It's the small group within the macro that creates the effect. And it's people like you, guys like you, that have chosen to dedicate and invest yourself into things like this. You guys will not allow this experiment known as America to fail. You won't. You just won't. And it's a pleasant reminder to me that we have people like you that are going to pick up the ball and continue to push it down the field. So what you guys can do for me is live to your fullest, work hard, recognize that it's going to be really difficult. And because of that, makes it worthwhile.
Amen. Man after my own heart. Thank you for that, brother.